So a couple of days ago, I did a mushroom trip and took 4 grams. It was my first full trip in a really long time, and it's time to reflect on it. I wrote some things. Now that I'm, quote unquote sober and reading them, they sound a little bit absurd, but in the moment it's just so real. So I'm just gonna read some of the things I wrote. The experience is hyper real. None of it's real. So much attachment. It's fear. Everyone's doing that dumb chase. It's a pity. Because it's right in front of them. Am I losing my mind? What mind? I came back to say that nothing is real. That's the message. What trip are you on? The funny thing with mushrooms is that every time after a trip, it feels like I've conquered the world, I've conquered the universe, I've made an intergalactic adventure, and I've come back. But then it also feels like I never went at all. So it's this simultaneous feeling of I've traveled the world and discovered all its riches and all its secrets, but at the same time, I didn't go anywhere at all. And there was nowhere to go. There's nothing to collect. And it's this paradox that's so interesting about psychedelics. It's that as soon as you think you're achieving something, then that's when you're reminded that there's really nothing to achieve. And so it's this achieveless achievement. It's this getting somewhere by getting nowhere. It doesn't make sense when you speak about it like as a sober person. But anyways, during that trip, I would say there were 3 big phases. Phase 1 was this phase that was sort of focused on venting, on my own ventilation. It was me sort of just offloading other people's projections and other people's emotions that I come across and that I've become hyper aware of in everyday life. And the experience, the trip, it made those other people's projections hyper real. It really magnified them and sort of almost overwhelmed me with other people's projections, because you notice these little things that people do that they end up projecting onto you, whether that's, driving in traffic and the little things that people do, or you having a seemingly insignificant conversation with somebody at the store, or the cashier, or say one of the clients you work with, if you do a people-based service. But what the trip really did was it magnified, and it played in almost in like hyperspeed of all the people that I've recently come across, and then certain ways that they made me feel, or that they projected onto me, that even though necessarily in the moment when I was interacting with them I didn't give it any conscious thought, it is something that managed to lodge itself inside my head. And so the shrooms brought all of those out, and it sort of even exaggerated them. And I remember feeling during this ventilation phase, I felt like I was offloading a whole ton of baggage. And it was not even necessarily my baggage, because I've done a lot of work clearing that out. But it was more so a lot of other people's baggage that I think I'd absorbed, and I'd held on to, even though it was, unconscious. Now, the second phase of the trip is realization. And it was this main realization of how everybody's insecurities run so deep, so unimaginably deep. But then under the influence of the trip, it was just so obvious. It was the clearest thing in the world. But when you're sober and you're interacting with people on a normal day-to-day basis, you don't give that much thought at all. It sort of just it is swept under the rug, because we just all pretend like they don't exist. But the trip really did highlight and really bring to light how, at the root of it all, everyone is so deeply insecure. And it brought up a lot of flashbacks, just the same as how it did with the ventilation phase. A lot of these flashback memories, sort of how of certain interactions with people where they might have reacted in a strange way that you didn't really give a second thought when you're interacting with them. But during the trip, it replays, and then it suddenly clicks in your head. It's like, so that's why they reacted that way. It becomes as clear as glass. And the third phase is reconciliation. It's coming to terms with, although I felt so angry in the first phase, and although I realized how insecure everybody is deep down, and all the things that they do are merely just an effort to run away from it, the third phase of reconciliation, it reminded me of, it brought me to a state of compassion, where I was able to almost observe, without being attached or identified to anybody's projections, nor my own anger. And it was just this feeling of love and acceptance for all the imperfections and all the flaws of everybody. It was compassionate towards my anger, towards my sort of internalization of all of these projections. It was compassionate in allowing myself to vent all of that away and, shed it off. But it was also compassionate to that realization how everybody is just so deeply insecure. And you sort of just smile at it. It's sort of like, oh, you're on this trip? Well, I'm on this trip. We're all on different trips. We got different problems. We respond to it in different ways, and it's all perfect in the most seemingly imperfect and flawed way. That's how everything is perfect. And so I wrote on some flashcards. I'm just gonna read the three most profound realizations of the session. So on the trip, the mushroom spirit, God, spoke through me. It's how artists speak about how their creativity, their ideas, their inspiration, it comes to them out of their own control. And so if something was making me write on the pen, I think the camera's flipped, so yeah, it's flipped. But this is the first one I wrote. People are in love with hating themselves. And then other side, you can feel this energy in people. And that's what the shrooms really made so plainly obvious during the trip. Was this idea that people really do, they really are almost in love with hating themselves. And this sort of goes with that ventilation phase of offloading, of me wanting to shut off everyone else's projections, and then also that realization of how everyone's insecurity runs very deep. Now, I have to think about it back. In the moment, it felt so real, but as I reflect on it, it's sort of like you see how common it is for the idea behind this line, people are in love with hating themselves, is this idea of how thin of a veil it is when people pretend to be good or pretend to be nice. It's like a social veil, and it's getting thinner and thinner, and it's something I realize. And underneath that false veil of niceness or politeness, manners, is a sense of deep resentment. People don't like their lives. People don't like certain situations about their lives. People don't like the political situation. People don't like the people on the other side of the political coin. Whatever level of conflict you want to put it at, it's sort of this, I think it's realization into how thinly veiled our society functions, in that it's not very hard to tick someone off into their angry side, into their hateful side. All it takes is maybe cutting them off in traffic, budging in front of the line in the grocery store, like a very little petty thing can sort of set people off and away from the manner, the polite persona that they put on at the grocery store. And it can send them into sort of to reveal their true selves, which is a self of loathing and a self of resentment, which is hidden underneath that thin veil of politeness. And I think that's what this really this is trying to say about sort of our collective consciousness, is how much of it is that we're hiding behind a thin veil, and how it takes the smallest of things to rip that veil off and unveil the demon, almost. The second card I wrote is the Joker is in every one of us. And this is pretty well related to the first card of how people are in love with hating themselves. During the shroom trip, I realized I was just as psychotic as the people you have in, the psych wards, the people on medication, the people diagnosed with disorders. It's sort of this realization or acceptance. I think it's more appropriate to call it an acceptance of how the Joker is in every one of us. How the insanity is in every single one of us. And you exactly see glimpses of that insanity in the way that people break out of their persona when they get cut off in traffic, or their card gets declined at the grocery store. I remember just a couple of days ago, it was exactly like that. A guy in front of me at the grocery store, his card got declined, and he started like swearing underneath his mouth and stuff like that, and cursing like it wasn't that big of a deal. But I wasn't in his mind, so how could I know what he was going through? But this, it really is the same thing as what I was trying to say with the first card. The Joker is in every one of us, and the Joker is only hiding behind a very thin veil that we present to the world, to pretend that we are put together, we're civilized, we're nice, we're polite, we're good people. But a lot of that is just a pretension. Have you really come to see who you really are? Or have you just fluffed it under a persona and pretended that's all that you were? Because if you really look deep within, and you really look, you might discover that you're a monster But that monster is not something to be condemned. Rather, it's something you have to reconcile with. And the third card, everyone is just so afraid to feel. Again, it continues to play on how we're scared of our emotions, how we're scared of who we really are underneath the social veil we so thinly put up. And it's like, no wonder you have all these ego contests and you know these like big guy personas, and like these attitudes towards other people, which is like just so like hostile and sort of like me and you, me against you, us against them, that sort of hostility and separation. It really just boils down to how insecure we are deep inside, and how we're so afraid to feel that insecurity that we end up pushing it and projecting it outwards. We become so falsely convinced that the demon is out there. Have you ever looked inside? And so this is the whole thing. To become whole, and this is what Carl Jung talked about, of the integration of the shadow, is everyone has a dark side to them. And there's not many people who are going to admit to that dark side, because most people naively think they're good. And it is this naive thinking which causes them to repress and deny their own dark side, and to project that outwards and put it onto other people. And you know what that is? That's called a scapegoat. Boy, you can see this in the political sphere. And it's because the vast majority of people have never reconciled with the wolf within. Then they externalize all the evil. And they think, the world's such a terrible place. These people. It's because of these people. When really, they just need to come back to the feeling inside. And come back and love the wolf that is within. And only then, when we stop projecting so much negativity externally and onto other people, and stop giving our own insecurities so much power over us just because we refuse to acknowledge them. And so I guess this is the essence of that shroom trip. It's this, to become whole again through the unification of the light and the shadow, the yin and the yang, and to transcend duality, and to realize that everything is one. If you enjoyed this dialogue, give the video a thumbs up. I would appreciate it. Consider subscribing, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.